We're here aboard the whale watching vessel out of San Diego Bay, and we're here with one of the naturalists who's on board, whose name is Carrie. She's from the Birch Aquarium at Scripps, and we invited her over to ask a few questions about the whales we've seen. So tell us about the whales we saw today here, some of the things about them.
Well, today we saw some of the Pacific gray whales, eastern Pacific gray whales. We saw about 4 or 5 today. We saw them breathing. We could see their blow. The blow gets up to about 10 to 15 feet out of the water, so you can see it from pretty far away. And then we saw some sounding today, which is when they arch their back and you can see some of their dorsal knuckles, and then you can see their fluke and they'll dive down, and that means they're down for a couple of minutes for a shallow dive. So we saw some gray whales today, porpoising, breathing, and sounding.
Now tell us a little bit about what they eat.
Well, the gray whales are a bottom feeder, and they don't have any teeth. They're a kind of baleen whale, which means instead of teeth, they have what's called baleen. It's a filter. It's kind of like the bristles of a broom that hang down from their mouth, and they use it as a filter. So the gray whales will go down to the bottom of the ocean up by Alaska, where their feeding grounds are, up in the Chukchi Seas, and they'll take a big scoop of mud, and then they'll filter that out through their baleen. And the baleen will catch all the little amphipods and krill and little shellfish, things that they like to eat. So their favorite thing to eat is something called an amphipod, which is kind of like a beefy shrimp. It's about that big. And those are up in Alaska. We don't have them here in San Diego. So when they're migrating, they don't eat at all, really, for about 5 to 7 months until they get back up to their feeding grounds in Alaska, which is where they're going to be eating.
Right. I think it's amazing that they take this very long migration, and they're right in the middle of it. So the ones we saw are headed north, right?
Yes, the ones we saw are headed north. So right now there's a lot of gray whales in the lagoons at Baja. So their migration is pretty long. They have the longest migration of any animal as a species. So it's from about 10 to 14,000 miles round trip from Alaska down to Baja and then back to Alaska. So when they're in Alaska, they're feeding. And then when they go down to Baja, that's where they're going to be having their babies and doing some mating. So right now, at this time of year, there's a lot of gray whales down in the lagoons at Baja. And there's a couple of stragglers still going down to the lagoons, but mostly the whales that we see now in San Diego are going back up to Alaska. So they're going northbound, and that's what we saw today with our whales. They were heading north.
I think it's really neat that the gray whales are one of the few animals that's ever been removed from the endangered species list because their numbers have come back so well.
Yeah.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. They've come back from near extinction twice. So in the early 1800s, when there was a lot of whaling going on, their numbers went down to only a couple hundred individuals, which was near extinction. And then whaling stopped for a while because it wasn't really worth it for them to go out with only that many whales left. And so their numbers went back up. And then in the early 1900s was the invention of the exploding harpoon. So the end of the harpoon would explode, and so there was more whaling going on in the early 1900s because their numbers were back up and they had this new harpoon. So that caused the whale numbers to go back down to a couple hundred individuals. So they were almost extinct again. And then the Marine Mammal Protection Act was passed, and that's protecting the gray whales. So whaling is no longer legal here. And so we've seen their numbers come back up. So they have come back up twice from near extinction. So we think their numbers are at about 20,000 individuals right now. Of course, you can't count them all, but that's what we estimate their numbers to be.
Yeah, we saw that today with the whales that we saw. It's hard to tell. Only when they come up for a breath at the surface altogether can you really do an accurate count. So that's very difficult to actually tell. Now, in terms of whale watching cruise, you've been doing this for a while here, and the purpose of this is for the people that are on board to get a nice close look at gray whales?
Yeah, right. We're just trying to provide a cruise for the public to go out and see some of the whales in their natural habitat. We do have SeaWorld right here and the Birch Aquarium and places that are not in the natural habitat, but it's nice to be able to take the public out and educate them on the gray whales and some of the behaviors and some of the conservation issues and let them see the gray whales in their natural habitat. So that's what we're trying to do. It's Harbor Excursions is who takes us out on the boat. They drive us and take care of everything on the boat, and then Scripps, people from, like me, from the Birch Aquarium will come out and just talk about all the different nature that we'll see and about the gray whales.
Great. Well, thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure
You're
being out
welcome.
on board today.
Thanks for having me.